Everyone, welcome to episode 135, Rhett Smith Podcast. Welcome to my studio, otherwise known as the guest bedroom, which has also become my home work office since COVID. When I'm not in the office seeing clients, I'm here working, doing other things. So at some point, hopefully I'll get, some cool, intriguing background for you all to look at. But that's what I'm doing, home podcast studio. Hopefully the sound is a little better too. I'm experimenting with some different mics and stuff. As I mentioned in the last episode, some of the quality was not that great, and you had to like turn the volume up super high, especially if you want to go for a run or something. And this is a work in progress. One of my goals is my daughter, since my daughter and son are way better at this, they're going to teach me some Adobe Audition, Adobe video editing. So things may get a little fancier, but hopefully still just down to earth and raw, right? Authentic. This is about authentic as it gets. So in this episode, it's going to be a little bit of show and tell. And if you're just listening, then that's okay. You don't have to be watching this. But if you want to hop onto the podcast video at my YouTube channel or on my website, you can do that as well. I'm going to show a few different items. But what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about breathing, which may sound kind of boring to all of you. But let me say this. I have doubled down on the importance of breath work here in the last, 6, 7, 8 months probably. I've always thought it was super important. As someone who has struggled most of their life with anxiety, I know that one's ability to regulate breathing is so critical in terms of helping anxiety, in terms of helping with panic, just in terms of emotional regulation. I know that the marriage work I've done, especially when we were doing marriage intensives at a retreat center, one of the key pieces that we talked about was just emotional regulation and the ability for one to calm themselves down so they can create a safe place to interact with their partner. And the training I did with Terry Hargrave in restoration therapy, emotional regulation is so critical. When that fight or flight part of our brain, that amygdala gets triggered and we move into like panic and anxiety, or what people often refer to as fight, flight, or freeze, it just creates all kinds of anxiety for us, right? And so one's ability to regulate emotion, and it's specifically tied to our ability to breathe and to calm ourselves down. And I've seen this just play itself out in my therapy work, in my own personal life, and so much more since last March, a year ago, March, when COVID came and anxiety numbers just increased like crazy. And I was doing workshops through Zoom, mostly on anxiety, some on depression, mostly anxiety, for churches and parents and youth groups. And I started talking about breath work more in the executive coaching with clients I was working with. And I talk about it all the time in my practice. And I just, about 6 months ago, doubled down on it even more so. And here's why. Though it's always been important to me, I read a book back in early fall, probably late summer, by a guy named James Nestor. The book is called Breath. Subtitle is The New Science of a Lost Art. And it's just all about breathing. And it's one of the most fascinating books I've read. And I just couldn't put it down. And just the science of breathing and the stuff he gets into it in terms of how as we developed as Homo sapiens and our brains grew bigger, which was a good thing, right? We learned how to do things and survive. It pushed out and it made our nasal cavities smaller, which caused all kinds of problems. And he even gets into some fascinating studies and research about looking at old skulls and how, older ones, he talked about how teeth were straight and mouths were shaped differently because the noses were smaller and the nasal cavity wasn't as pushed out. And so it's like really fascinating. And I'm not going to get into all of that, but I am going to focus on breathing and tell you why it's so important. And one of the things that has stood out to me more than anything is he talked about how mouth breathing is really bad for you. And again, he gets into all the research and science on this, but essentially, not only is there health implications because our mouth is open and we're breathing all this stuff in, but one of the things that stood out to me more than anything is that we just get less oxygen to the brain. One of the statistics from the book is that we get 25% more oxygen to the brain per nostril breath than we do through our mouth. And so think about the numbers. For example, I'm just going to make it up, and I have my calculator right here, and you'll see it in the video. So let's just say, on average, I'm just going to make up a number here, but let's say I take 40 breaths a minute, right? And let's say that's over an hour, that's 2,400, right? And so over the course of the day, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 50,000, 57,000, right? And one of the things he talks about in terms of sleep is that people often breathe through their mouth, but they're unaware of that. And so if you breathe, again, let's say 40 times a minute per hour, so 2,400 breaths, and let's say you sleep 8 hours, 19,200 breaths. And if you're breathing through your mouth primarily, that is a huge loss of oxygen to the brain. And when we lose oxygen to the brain, right, it tends to cut off our ability to regulate our emotions and instead increase anxiety and panic and all kinds of other issues, right? One of the things I notice a lot as a therapist when someone is in my office having a panic attack is that they literally stop breathing. And as they stop breathing, right, less oxygen goes to the brain, which increases this panic. And then that just increases the anxiety and things just start to really escalate. And so one of the things I do first is just have them pause and stop and just say, hey, let's take a breath. Let's keep breathing. Sometimes their partner's in the office and the partner just starts helping them breathe by modeling it for them. But on many occasions, just helping a person stop and take some deep breaths is really critical. And so this book was so fascinating. He talked about mouth breathing. And, from what I gather, I'm not a mouth breather. I don't snore. Maybe there's an occasion like snore on a moment, and then my wife will, wake me up and tell me to turn over, and then snoring's gone. But I've never really been a snorer. None of my friends tell me I'm a snorer. My wife doesn't tell me I'm a snorer. And so for the most part, I think I breathe through my nose. I've practiced it a lot over the years anyways, through some of the breathing exercises and the meditation work that I've done. But he talks about in this book about how unhealthy mouth breathing can be. And so one of the things that he recommends in the book is that you tape your mouth shut at night for 10 days. In fact, they did a study in the book where they did it two different ways. First, they clogged up nasal, like they stuffed the nasal pathways, so they're forced just to breathe through their mouth. And then they reversed it for another 10 days where they close the mouth off and just breathe through their nose. And so in the book, he says, I recommend 10 days, tape your mouth shut and just experiment what that's like. And one of the keys is that with your mouth shut, taped shut, it'll force you to breathe through your nose, right? And so I decided to do this and experiment. And I had listened to some people who'd already tried this before, and I thought I would try. And so what I did, if you're watching the video, I'm going to show you. I took this Next Care tape. I just bought it at like CVS, Walgreens. I do the waterproof. It's a surgical tape made by Next Care. This is a wider one. And I would take a strip off about this big, probably, if you're listening, a little bigger than the length of my index finger. And then I would place it right here over the center of my mouth. So if you can see in the video like this. And that would stay on all night. And the first night I did this, I put on a lot. I put one across my mouth and I put it on the sides, not knowing if it would stay on. And I walked out of the bathroom, and I think my wife thought Hannibal Lecter was walking out. So I realized I had to modify it. And so eventually the strips got smaller and smaller until essentially just over my lip. And sometimes I would make it smaller and just put it over, if you're watching a video, like where it's just a small piece, sometimes running vertically and then sometimes horizontally. And if it's just kind of purses the mouth shut, it was enough to inhibit mouth breathing. There's all kinds of different tapes you can use. Don't recommend something like super strong, right? Like duct tape or something. I did notice over time, sometimes my lips would become chapped, which would become a problem. So for some people, you just got to experiment with different types of tape. One of the tapes I have not experimented with, I'm going to show you. This was given to me actually by a client. And I've used it and I like it. It's called Insomnia Fix. You can go to their website or you can go to Amazon and you can get 28 strips for 19 bucks. And I'm going to show you exactly what this is like. If you're watching the video, if I can get this open, and I might not be able to. So it's a clear, essentially piece of tape. So clear, you can't really see it, obviously. And it's pretty small. It's shaped like a mouth. And I want to put it on here if I can. Actually, what I'm going to do, instead of stripping it off and putting it on, I'm just going to show on video. It looks like this. So it looks like lips almost, and it's clear. So you don't look like Hannibal Lecter when you come out of the bathroom. So my goal was to go and do this for 10 days. And I loved it so much that I ended up actually going 110 days. So, a little over 3 months. And the only reason I stopped was I just wanted to stop and just see what it was like not to do it. And I'm now in a place where sometimes I tape it and sometimes I don't. But I think what I realized early on is I don't breathe through my mouth really, but having tape over it actually inhibited any type of mouth breathing. And so I'm going to read you something that I posted on my Instagram back on, I'll tell you the date. Let me pull it up here. It's December 5th, and I'm going to read what I wrote. It says, so I tape my mouth shut at bedtime for 110 nights in a row. I posted about this several months ago as it was inspired by the suggestion in the great book by James Nestor, Breath, The New Science of Lost Art. And to my surprise, many of you already have been doing this over the years. Let me pause for a second. Yeah, when I posted this first photo on Instagram, back in let's see, this is in December. I'm reading, so this would have been back in September. People started messaging me like, oh yeah, I've been doing that for a while, or my doctor recommended this. And so I thought I was onto something new. Apparently not. People have been doing this for a long time. And people had in their messages to me said it has been a great benefit to them. So pick back up. It says the book suggests that 50% of the population breathes through their mouths, which can actually lead to a lot of health issues, and that each nasal breath takes in 25% more oxygen. That's a lot of lost oxygen to the body and brain over the course of the day. And the cumulative effect of that long-term in not only health, but one's ability for emotional regulation is quite staggering. He recommends this tape exercise in the book to assess various things and to hinder mouth breathing. And though I rarely breathe through my mouth, I wanted to try it. So many things happened because of this practice. Okay, and then I'm going to list what I wrote. This is what I noticed after 110 days of taping my mouth. Number 1, I slept deeper at night, rarely waking up or moving around in my sleep. 2, REM and deep sleep measures improved. And I measured those primarily by looking at the data on my watch and stuff. Number 3, all measures of my anxiety dropped significantly. So I noticed my anxiety just seemed to be gone. I just seemed calm. Number 4, resting heart rate dropped into the mid 40s. Number 5, I could relax my breathing down to 4 to 5 slow breaths a minute in breathing practices. So as I worked on this, some of the exercises he recommends is just slow breath, and that when we're calm and relaxed, we can get down our breathing to 3-4 breaths a minute. I got mine down to 4 to 5 without, feeling like I was working too hard at it. Number 6, I was more aware of my breathing patterns throughout the day, therefore having more command of my emotional regulation. Yeah, just taping your mouth brings a sense of awareness that you're just thinking about your breathing a lot. And so I was already just more noticing of when my patterns for breathing would be disrupted. And I thought I was already really good at this because as a therapist and as a trained restoration therapist who's really big focus on emotional regulation, and as someone who struggles with anxiety and writes about anxiety, I'm always thinking about my breath and paying attention to it. But this just amped awareness up even more. Number 7, I fell asleep faster at night as taping became a cue to my body and brain that it was time to go to sleep. I had several friends share this too, that as soon as they taped their mouth up, It's like their brain said, time to go to bed. Number 8, workouts such as running, biking, lifting weights saw increased performance. So yeah, I just felt more calm when I lifted weights, more calm when I ran. Biking seemed easier. Number 9, I think it improved my experience in high elevation. I practiced some of the recommended nasal breath runs for my run at the Grand Canyon. So yeah, one of the things he recommends in the book is trying some different running exercises where you're practicing breathing in certain specific ways. And there's different routines and patterns. But one of the things I did in my runs training is I'd practice breathing in my nose, like, and out my mouth, and doing it at a very kind of regular pace while running, really focused on it. And then other times I'd run and only practice breathing in my nose and then out my nose. And that's a lot more difficult. And the faster my cadence went and my tempo went, it became more difficult. So I was really focused on breathing. And I started to notice how often sometimes my breathing gets dysregulated on my runs. And I'm not paying attention. So I focused on that. And I really focused on certain breathing patterns as I saw that there was some research that said some types of breathing practices that are really focused on nasal breath work and tempo can mimic high altitude training. And so I was going to be at the Grand Canyon in October to run the rim to rim to rim, which is, higher elevation there at the Grand Canyon. I think it gets as high as like 8,500 on the North Rim, which, I'm in McKinney, Texas, which is 640 feet. And I had zero problems. I grew up in Arizona, but at the canyon, a little higher, I just had zero problems acclimating to the canyon, which I guess some people might. That's up, past Flagstaff, but not that high, 8,500. I'd be curious to try this and see what happens when I go to like Breckenridge or climb a 14er or something in Colorado. Number 10, I just felt an improved general calm. And then number 11, I rarely snore, but zero snoring since taping. Just no snoring. My wife hasn't mentioned any snoring. I've asked her about it. So those are things that I wrote. And then I continued in this post. Because of this book and my experimentation with the last few months, I've doubled down even more on breathing practices for my clients in therapy, as well as the executives I'm coaching. Everyone has reported significant benefits from either mouth taping or using some of the recommended breathing exercises I talked about. Anxiety has long been the most significant mental health problem statistically, and those numbers have increased drastically. So I write a lot about this, and that's the reason really I started to double down on breathing exercises. And all these things I started to notice in terms of just less anxiety, more calm, more emotional regulation. And then I started to incorporate it, as I mentioned in some of my training. Another thing I'll show you here in the video, you won't see it, but this is called an expand-along. You can order it on Amazon. I think it's like, depending where I think it's like $19, maybe a little more. Essentially, it's like a mouthpiece. It's a mouthpiece you put in your mouth. And at the end of this mouthpiece, for those of you not watching, there's a dial. And you can turn the dial either direction. If you turn it to the left, it closes up oxygen that you can come into your mouth. So it forces all breathing through your nose, because as when this mouthpiece is in and you turn the dial all the way to the left, you can't get any oxygen through your mouth. And then if you turn it to the right, you can calibrate how much breathing you want to allow into your mouth. So for example, I'm gonna put it in my mouth. So you could hear me for a second breathing air in, and then you could hear me not breathing in. So that was me just calibrating this dial. And so I would wear this mouthpiece when I lift weights sometimes. And I would turn the dial all the way to the left so I couldn't get any oxygen in my mouth, and it would force all my breath work through my nose and my nasal. And I'd wear this typically, like I said, jumping rope, lifting weights. I haven't worn it when I run. It just doesn't feel like a comfortable thing to wear. And I just focus on breath work for running. Some of you may have noticed people wearing some big masks, kind of looking scary masks like Bane from Batman running around town. This is kind of like that, but it's a smaller mouthpiece. So I've tried all these things just to experiment. And ultimately, to simplify it, what I've come back to is that, breath work is really important for us to do. It helps us regulate our emotional activity, which helps us to be more in control of issues like anxiety, depression, anger. When we're emotionally regulated and in control of our breath, we create safe space, I would say, in relationships, right? Which allows people to connect, for example, and to work through issues. But when our emotions are dysregulated because of breathing and panic, it's really hard to work on things with people. And so, there's lots I think you could look at in this. I'd probably recommend a few things. One, I highly recommend the book Breath by James Nestor. I did actually an Audible. I thought it was a good book to listen on Audible. So I listened to a lot when I was driving or running, just walking. But I'd recommend that book. I recommend also that you Google James Nestor and the Art of Manliness podcast. And I say that because it's a good just kind of intro into, without reading the book, James Nestor goes into why this is important. But if you Google him in this book and podcast, you'll see him on a lot of interviews talking about this. So one, check it out yourself. I also recommend on your phone, I was going to show you the apps, but it's easy for you to look on your own phone. I've been using Headspace since like 2011, I think, maybe longer. I think it's just a simple tool. Excuse me. There are seasons when I use it once, 2 times a day. And there are seasons where it's more scattered than that. I have for many years used the free version. And then in recent years at different seasons, I've subscribed to it. When you subscribe to it, there's different packs or tracks you can follow, like an anxiety track, a depression track. And I love it. And I think, I do. I credit Headspace as really helping me understand how to regulate my emotions through breath work. I know the app Calm is really popular. You see it advertised a lot, especially with a lot of athletes. I've been experimenting the last 3 weeks with a new app, or it's new to me, called Breath Work. It's spelled breath, and then work is just WRK. And I like it. And it sends me reminders to my watch sometimes about, are you awake? Are you asleep? Try this, try that. And so I'm just playing around with that. So there's some really good apps. So I recommend trying different apps. An app I go to a lot when my anxiety is high and I have a hard time breathing is, there's a hypnotist that I really like named Andrew Jackson. He's got an app called Don't Panic. And that's a longer one, like 45 minutes. And he really kind of gets into like breath work and breathing. So there are apps I really love to use. And so check the book out, listen to some podcasts, just get some knowledge around the importance of breath work and why it would be important to you. Check out some of the apps. I would encourage you to try to incorporate into some of your activity. So when you're running, pay attention to your breathing patterns. He's got suggestions in the book, but for me, a simple thing is just when you're running, just to notice how you're breathing and to pay attention to it. As I'm breathing, am I breathing in my nose and really taking in oxygen? And I think it's okay to breathe out your mouth. In fact, I think it's easier as you breathe out your mouth to breathe more in. I noticed that when I breathe in just my nose and then breathe out my nose, I felt a little more restricted. But the goal is to experiment and try some things out. Play around with it in terms of exercise and lifting weights, and kind of just notice and pay attention. The other thing is, try taping your mouth at night. Some people reported actually getting anxiety and panic with having tape in their mouth. And they're like, did you experience that? What would you do? And I didn't experience any of that. It was a little weird at first, the first night, but then I didn't notice it after that at all. I just forgot it was on there. I think if you experience panic with your mouth taped at night, it probably tells you a couple of things. One, it probably informs you that you probably are a mouth breather to a certain degree, because you're panicking because you're not able to get that breath you're normally getting through your mouth. And two, I think there's some mental stuff going on, that just the idea of like having your mouth taped shut can be inhibiting for people. But I think it gives us an opportunity to actually practice the breath work and to work through some of that anxiety. So try taping your mouth. Again, NextCare, I use the waterproof tape, CVS, it's inexpensive. You can try the Insomnia Fix. There's different things you can try. And try it for 10 days. And then afterwards, just evaluate and see what you want to do. I also would recommend just practice your breath work and connect it to other things. So for me, being in the Christian faith tradition, I'm really fascinated. In the Hebrew, the word for breath is, my Hebrew's bad, but ruach. I can never get the guttural sound very well in Hebrew, but ruach. And just this idea that it almost becomes indistinguishable, this idea of breath and God at different parts in the Old Testament. And breath is this animating force, life that gives us life, right? It's what breathes essentially this like life into into creation. Um, in the New Testament, the word pneuma, which can be translated as spirit or wind, right, or Holy Spirit, it gives us life. It's breath, and so there's this almost indistinguishable line between breath and the spirit, which gives us life. And so I'm fascinated that we're again human beings put in bodies, and that um, who we are at a very basic level is connected to our ability to breathe. And so it makes sense that how we breathe and paying attention to our breathing is really critical to our functioning and to our health, right? And then one day when we stop breathing, right, life is gone. And so you want to connect it to other things. And so I guess what I was going to say is that for me, probably for the last 6 years, 7 years, I connect it to one verse. I'll do some breathing exercises and I'll sit in my chair, and there's a psalm I love, Psalm 46:10. It's be still and know that I'm God. And so as I'm doing that verse, as I'm thinking about that verse, as I breathe in my nose, I'll think about the phrase be still. And then when I exhale out of my mouth, I'll think about know that I'm God. And so I try to connect my faith intimately to this breath work. And there's lots of things you could try. I've had several clients say that was one of the best practices they've ever done. Other people, you can connect your breath work to like a mantra or to a phrase, or you can do a visual imagery. One of the things that's really helpful for me is when I'm sitting in a chair, or I may lay down on a floor or bed, as I put my hand on my diaphragm, because when you breathe in, your diaphragm should move out, and then when you exhale, your diaphragm shrink back in. And so for me, having my hand on my belly helps me kind of moderate and to notice the breath coming in and out, and it has a real calming effect. And I'll encourage people that I work with and students, for example, that it's really easy to sit in your classroom and start to feel anxious about something or panic. They can do some breathing and calming exercises, and no one around them would ever know that's going on. And then other times, people that I know practice a really aggressive form of breathing. It's like this real kind of like aggressive type thing. And so you want to connect it to other things. One of the biggest turning points for me in my own life is my therapist had me practice one day in session, actually creating panic in myself. And one of the ways he did that was he was encouraging me kind of to like take shortness of breath, to like bring anxiety in myself, to imagine me becoming anxious. And as I imagined myself becoming anxious, I noticed I was getting shallower breath and I started to panic. And then he's like, start breathing and calm yourself down. And then so I started breathing it through my nose and calming myself down. And without him saying it, what I understood he was trying to teach me to do was that I have the ability to not only be the creator of my own anxiety by my inability to calm myself through proper breathing and emotional regulation techniques, but I also have the ability to calm myself down, right? I do both. I create panic and I can calm panic. And all of it's connected to my breathing, which regulates my emotions, and on and on and on. And when he taught me that, that became one of the most powerful exercises for me. And so I want you to notice as you go through your day, just to experiment with noticing your breath and notice your ability to create your own anxiety and panic by breathing shallow, by breathing through your mouth, by not getting proper breath work through your nostrils. But also notice your ability to slow down, to notice your breath, to breathe through your nose and to exhale out your mouth, and do it in slow patterns. That it's all there right within you. And it's the key. It's the key really, in my mind, to a lot of health. It's the key to relational success, because we have to be able to stay calm and regulate emotions to connect with other people and to actually problem solve and to work through issues. It's the key in performance, the ability to show up in the starting line of a race or the free throw line in a basketball game, or the clock's ticking in a football game. There's a lot of things. It's our ability to calm ourselves down that improves our performance. So it's essential to all kinds of things. So that's why I'm doubling down on breath work more than ever in my own life and with the people that I work with. And that's why I recommend this to you. Simple things. Check the book out, Breath by James Nestor. Play around with the idea of taping your mouth shut for 10 days. And then just experiment with some practices over the next month and just notice and see what happens. And just notice if your anxiety drops. And again, I'll post these notes in the show notes and these links and some ideas. And then I'm going to post it on Instagram. If you have any comments about some of the practices that have been beneficial to you or what you've noticed, please comment. And I appreciate you, tuning into this podcast, and have a great day. We'll talk to you later.